Welcome to one of the most fascinating and practical chapters in economics, game theory. You might think game theory sounds abstract, but I promise you use game theory thinking every day. When you decide whether to study for an exam based on what you think your classmates are doing, when Netflix decides whether to spend billions on original content based on what Amazon Prime and Disney Plus are doing, or when Apple times their cell phone releases based on Samsung's expected moves. That's all game theory. Today we're going to learn the formal tools that help managers make better strategic decisions when the outcome depends not just on what you do, but on what your competitors do too. All right, let's walk through what we'll cover today. Think of these as your strategic thinking toolkit. We'll start with the fundamentals. What is game theory and how do we diagram strategic situations? Then we'll explore dominant strategies, which are your no-brainer moves that work regardless of what competitors do. The prisoner's dilemma is everywhere in business, from pricing wars to advertising battles. We will see how this plays out both between companies and even within firms between different departments. Nash equilibrium is the key concept. It's the stable outcome where nobody wants to change their strategy given what everybody else is doing. Also cover mixed strategies, adding randomness to keep competitors guessing, sequential games when timing matters, and first mover advantages. The goal isn't just to understand the theory, but to think strategically about real business decisions. Here's the core insight of game theory. In strategic situations, you can't just optimize in isolation. You have to think like your competitors and anticipate their responses. This is different from the optimization problems we studied earlier. When Starbucks decides whether to open a new location, they can't just consider their own cost and demand. They have to think about how Dunkin' might respond, whether local coffee shops will cut prices, and also how the whole competitive landscape might shift. We make two key assumptions. All players are rational. They're trying to maximize their payoffs, and each player tries to anticipate what rivals will do. These aren't always perfectly true in the real world, but they give us a powerful starting point for strategic thinking. Let's start with the simplest type of game, simultaneous moves where the interaction happens just once. Simultaneous doesn't necessarily mean at exactly the same moment. It means each player makes their decision without knowing what the other has chosen. Think about Black Friday pricing. Walmart and Target both have to set their prices before they see what the other is charging. Non-repeated means this is a one-shot deal. There's no next time to worry about. This assumption will become important later when we see how repeated interactions can change strategic behavior dramatically. Let's dive into our first real example. Boeing and Airbus are bidding for a major airline contract. They each have to submit sealed bids, high or low, without knowing what the other will build. Now look at this payoff matrix carefully. The numbers represent millions in profit for each company. Let's say Boeing is considering a high price bid. If Airbus also bids high, Boeing makes $750 million. But if Airbus bids low while Boeing bids high, Boeing gets nothing. They lose the contract and get zero. Now here's the key insight. What's Boeing's best strategy? Well, let's think through this systematically. If Airbus bids high, Boeing should bid low. Say 1,000 million is greater than 750 million. If Airbus bids low, Boeing should still bid low, 500, somewhere between 500 million and zero. No matter what Airbus does, Boeing is better off bidding low. That's called a dominant strategy. The same logic applies to Airbus. Low bidding is dominant for them too. So we predict both will bid low, earning $500 million each. Notice that if they could somehow coordinate, they'd both be better off bidding high and earning $750 million each. But in a one-shot simultaneous game, that coordination is impossible. Now, when we don't have dominant strategies, we use Nash equilibrium to predict outcomes. A Nash equilibrium is a set of strategies where each player is doing the best they can given what the other players are doing. Here's the circle technique for finding Nash equilibria. For each cell, circle the best response for each player. A Nash equilibrium occurs where both players' best responses are circled in the same cell. You can see that here in this illustration. So let's continue on with our Boeing Airbus example. In the upper left, both of them bid low. Boeing's payoff is $500 million. Is this their best response if Airbus is low? If we look down the left column, Boeing could get zero by bidding high instead. So yes, $500 million is better, and so we circle it. Doing the same for Airbus in this cell, we circle their $500 million too. When both payoffs are circled in the same cell, that is a Nash equilibrium. It's stable because neither player wants to unilaterally change their strategy. The Nash equilibrium is powerful because it predicts what rational players will do even in complex strategic situations. In our example, low-low is both the dominant strategy outcome and the Nash equilibrium. Not all games involve pure competition. Some players benefit from coordination. Imagine Boeing and Airbus are choosing communication technology standards for their aircraft. Both benefit if they choose the same standard. Airlines prefer compatibility, suppliers can achieve economies of scale, etc. In this coordination game that you see here, we have two Nash equilibria, alpha-alpha and beta-beta. Both companies prefer the same outcome, but which one will they choose? This is where pre-commitment and communication become valuable. If Boeing can credibly announce their choice first, Airbus will follow. The mixed coordination competition game shows a more realistic scenario. Boeing prefers alpha, they get $100 million versus $50 million, while Airbus prefers beta, they get $100 million versus $50 million when choosing beta. This creates tension. Both want coordination, but each prefers a different coordinated outcome. Some other real-world examples include tech standard battles, Blu-ray versus HD versus DVD. Other examples might be social media platforms. Everyone benefits from being on the same platform, but platforms compete for which ones become dominant. And even simple things like which side of the road to drive on. Sometimes there's no pure strategy Nash equilibrium, or sometimes you want to be unpredictable. That's where mixed strategies come in. Mixed strategies involve randomization. In the advertising example, Boeing benefits from matching Airbus's strategy. They get $10 million when both choose the same campaign, while Airbus benefits from differentiation. They get $10 million when choosing different campaigns. This creates a matching pennies type situation. If strategies were predictable, the other player could exploit that knowledge. But if both players randomize with 50% profitability, neither can gain an advantage by deviating. When might you use mixed strategies in business? Security is a classic example. Airports randomly select passengers for additional screening because predictable patterns could be exploited. Netflix might randomly test different interface designs to prevent competitors from easily copying their user experience insights. Sports provide great examples too. Soccer penalty kicks involved mixed strategies. Goalkeepers and shooters both randomized their choices because being predictable would be exploited. Here's how to apply game theory thinking in practice. First, map out the strategic situation. Who are the players? What are their possible actions? What are the likely payoffs for each combination of actions? You don't need precise numbers. Even rough estimates help clarify strategic thinking. Second, look for dominant strategies, your own and your competitors. If you have a dominant strategy, choose it. If competitors have dominant strategies, assume that they're going to choose them. And third, when there are no dominant strategies, think through the Nash equilibrium. What outcome is stable? Where does everyone want to stay put given what others are doing? This type of analysis helps explain why price wars happen, prisoners' dilemmas, why standards battles are so intense in coordination games, and why some strategies involve deliberate unpredictability in mixed strategies. Real business often involves sequential moves where timing matters. When decisions happen in sequence, we analyze them using backward induction and extensive form games. The tree diagram shows Boeing choosing first, then Airbus responding after observing Boeing's choice. This is very different from simultaneous moves. Let's use backward induction. Start at the end and work backward. If Boeing chooses Alpha, what will Airbus do? Looking at the payoffs, Airbus gets 50 from choosing Alpha and 40 from choosing Beta, so they're going to choose Alpha. If Boeing chooses Beta, Airbus gets 25 from Alpha and 100 from Beta, so they're going to choose Beta. Now, Boeing can anticipate these responses. If Boeing chooses Alpha, the outcome will be Alpha Alpha, with Boeing getting 100. If Boeing chooses Beta, the outcome will be Beta Beta, with Boeing getting 50. So we know Boeing will choose Alpha. The equilibrium path is Boeing chooses Alpha, Airbus responds with Alpha, Boeing gets 100, Airbus gets 50. Notice that Boeing benefits from moving first. They get their preferred coordinated outcome. This is called first mover advantage. Some other real-world examples include technology platform battles, iOS versus Android, retail location choices. Starbucks picks premium spots, then the competitors respond. And also market entry timing. Netflix moved first into streaming, forcing traditional media companies to respond. And those who didn't, like Blockbuster, they didn't make it. When games repeat, everything changes. The threat of future retaliation can sustain cooperative outcomes that would be impossible in one-shot games. Consider the classic prisoner's dilemma in business. Two companies could both charge high prices and earn good profits, but each has an incentive to undercut the other. In a one-shot game, both end up with low prices and low profits. But if they interact repeatedly, a company might think, if I cut my prices today, my competitor would retaliate tomorrow and we'll both be worse off in the long run. This long-term thinking can sustain high prices even without explicit agreements. Cooperation is more likely when future profits from cooperation outweigh short-term gains from cheating. It's easy to detect cheating. Price cuts are usually visible. The relationship is expected to continue indefinitely. Airlines often exhibit this pattern on specific routes. They implicitly coordinate on higher prices, but occasionally break out into price wars when someone cheats. This is also why Arthur Andersen and other Big Five accounting firms could maintain premium pricing for so long. They competed repeatedly across many clients and services. A firm that consistently undercuts others on price would face retaliation across multiple dimensions. Other firms might poach their best talent, exclude them from consortium deals, or compete more aggressively for their key clients. This repeated nature of competition helps sustain higher pricing than pure one-shot competition would predict. Game theory can also apply within organizations, not just between companies. The manager-employee monitoring game illustrates classic principal-agent problems. Kiana, the manager, must decide whether to spend resources on monitoring Lennon, the employee. Lennon must decide whether to work hard or to shirk. Each party's optimal choice depends on what they expect the other to do. If Lennon expects no monitoring, he'll shirk, less effort, same pay. If Kiana expects shirking, she'll monitor to catch the shirking. But if Lennon expects monitoring, he'll work to avoid punishment. And if Kiana expects hard work, she won't monitor to save costs. This creates a cycle with no stable, pure strategy equilibrium, hence the mixed strategy solution, where each player randomizes. The real managerial insight is that this monitoring game is inefficient for everyone. Better organizational design can solve the problem. Profit-sharing contracts align Lennon's incentives with company performance. He works hard because he directly benefits from good outcomes. The same logic applies to sales commissions, stock options for executives, and also team-based bonuses. The goal is to change the game structure itself rather than just playing the existing game better. Now, in addition to key takeaways from the previous lecture this week, as you're working on the Arthur Andersen case, consider these game theory applications. Pricing competition game. The big five accounting firms, Arthur Andersen, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, they faced classic game theory situations. In audit services, they could maintain higher prices through repeated interaction and reputational concerns. Aggressive price cutting would trigger retaliation across multiple clients and service lines. Bundling as a strategic move. Arthur Andersen's bundling of audit and consulting services created strategic advantages in competition with other firms. Once a client used bundled services, switching costs increased, changing the competitive game in Arthur Andersen's favor. Also, market entry decisions. When entering new geographic markets or service lines, Arthur Andersen had to consider competitors' likely responses. Early entry could establish first mover advantages, but might also trigger aggressive competitive responses. And then internal organizational games. Within Arthur Andersen, different service lines, audit versus consulting, for example, played strategic games over resource allocation, client relationships, and pricing authority. The firm's internal architecture had to manage these competing interests. Understanding these game theory dynamics helps explain both Arthur Andersen's strategic successes and the competitive pressures that ultimately contributed to the firm's challenges.